So we've just heard an extract from the Othello Suite by Samuel Coleridge Taylor, performed by the wonderful Chineke Orchestra earlier this year. My name's Tangam Debonair. I have the honour to be the Member of Parliament for Bristol West, and this morning I have the honour to be interviewing the wonderful Chi-Chi Nwankwo. And we're going to talk about all sorts of things. But first of all, Chi-Chi, I was just absolutely blown away when I saw Chineke perform, because as a young Black classical musician myself, once upon a time, a long time ago, it feels like now, there was never anything like this. And it had me quite emotional. So can you tell us a little bit, first of all, about how and why you came to be the person that did this marvelous thing and founded what I believed, I don't know if that's quite true, but the world's first ethnic minority classical orchestra?
Well, first of all, good morning, Tangam. I'm very, very pleased that you've called me today, and I feel, very honoured to be having this chat about, in probably the most challenging times of any of our lives, who've been around, even those of us who've been around, a few years. I have had the fortune I've had a classical music career as a performer on the international concert platform for 35 years, and was one of those people that, I think of myself as the one that got away, because I was always the only person of colour in any orchestra that I played with, and it kind of happened in a very sort of subtle way, because I was born in London, but then my family moved out to Kent, near Canterbury, and then to Berkshire, and especially in Kent, where I was until I was 14, we were the only Black family. And so white was my world. I was used to that. I never had a Black school friend or a Black teacher. My father was Black. My siblings were mixed race like me. My mother was white. White was it, and so I didn't really question it. And I was actually following a sprinting career up until I was nearly 18, when we'd moved to Berkshire by then, and I was at a girls' grammar school in Berkshire, and I was doing A-level music. I'd taken up music at the age of 6 on the recorder, then 7 on the piano, and neighbours wheeled their instruments up the piano up the road and gave me my first piano. And so we had people who loved us and who wanted to help us along. And, I know now that we were a poor family, financially poor, but only financially poor, because I felt very rich in every other possible way. My life was full, dynamic, adventurous, happy as a child, and in my last year at school, music was one of my A-level subjects, and I was asked to play in a women's football match, just sort of off the cuff, in Berkshire, and I didn't know that women played football. I used to play football with my two brothers, but proper football, and so I said, sure, yeah, fine. I mean, I played in the county hockey and first 11 for Berkshire, and netball county team, but sprinting was my thing. I was preparing for Montreal,
Wow.
and in this ridiculous football match, I was deliberately kicked and had the typical football injury, dislocated my knee, hospitalised for 2 weeks, and then my head of music got me, when I came out of hospital, said, you're the most musical girl in school. We think you could have a career in music if you take up this unpopular instrument. And it was a double bass. And I'm 5 foot nothing, and anyway, that was the first love story. I mean, it was love at first sight when I started to play the bass. But I think I just had a winning streak in me, really, Tangam, because a lot of people said, well, how come you made it, Chi-Chi? And I think it was because I'd had this amazing sprinting career where, I think all sports people who do very well with sports, they're used to winning. It really gives you some kind of confidence as a person in life, especially when you've got other things that you've got no control over,
Yeah.
where you might feel at loggerheads or vulnerable or a victim or something. I always felt my first 10 years of, from 8 to 18, I was a winner. I was a sprinter. I was used to performing on an international stage on the track. And so why would I suddenly feel that I was, you see what I mean? That I think that really helped. And that's why I really campaign and sort of for getting sports and music and the arts back into the classroom in every single state school in this country. Because, okay, I excelled in the classroom as well. I passed my 11 plus, I was at grammar school. But for those children who only excel outside the classroom, many of them have absolutely no chance today.
Yeah.
And
And
so yeah, well, it went from there really, and I got top jobs. I was the first principal player, probably first female double bass principal player in a London orchestra, possibly in the world. I really don't know. Certainly the first black one.
mm,
And and I think, years of having a very successful performing career. I also had a BBC Radio 3 program
yeah.
that ran for 4 years. I've done a lot of BBC presenting on TV as well. And I think I had a bit of a profile. And I was beginning to be invited to sit on boards of very established musical organisation boards, like the Association of British Orchestras, the National Youth Orchestra Board, the Royal Philharmonic Society Council. And these are very important musical organisations that look after the industry and the musicians. And I then started to meet Ed Vaizey a few times. He was the
Yep.
culture minister
Oh
during
yeah.
David Cameron. And he then started calling me to one side and saying, Chichi, why do we only ever see you regularly on the international concert platform? And by that, he meant the only black
Yeah.
person. And that's how the conversation started. And I reminded him that, look, when you see me on the stage, I'm on the stage to do my job. That's why I'm on the stage. I've never defined myself by the colour of my skin. That's what you're looking at. But now we're on the same page as far as this, why you've called me in for a meeting. Let's talk about this. And he wanted to know why, and I didn't know the answers, and I'd never ever investigated it. And today people say, why didn't you start Chineke 10 years ago? Why didn't you? And you know what? I think 10 years before I had started it wouldn't have been the right time. I don't think it would have been received in the same way as it was. And I think I believe in other powers, whatever they be, led me to launch it when I did.
Which was in 2015.
Yes, September 2015.
Yeah.
When the penny dropped, when I knew what I was going to do, I'd been at a concert at the Royal Festival Hall the night before, and I'd bumped into Ed Vaizey walking from Waterloo Station to the Royal Festival Hall, and he said, I guess you're going to the same concert I'm going to. And I said, probably am, which was the 20th anniversary of the Kinshasa Orchestra
Yeah.
from the Congo. And I didn't, for me, an orchestra from Africa, I was so excited about this. And so Ed asked me to go with him to the reception, which I hadn't been invited to. And as we got to the door of the reception, Gillian Moore, the head of music, was greeting all the guests. And I've known Gillian Moore all my career as well. And she, we said hello to Gillian, and her greeting was clapping her hands over her face in horror. And then we all started to talk at the same time. I said, look, I know I haven't been invited to the reception. And Ed Vaizey was saying, she's my guest, so she's invited. And Gillian
Yeah.
was saying, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I should have been on the guest list. And then she said, but what's worse, Chichi, look over there. And over there in the corner, another friend of mine, Tasmin Little, wonderful British violin soloist, was giving an interview to this enormous BBC television camera. And that was when I discovered that the BBC and the Arts Council England were supporting a documentary about the Kinshasa Orchestra. And Gillian was freaking out because I was not in front of that camera talking, and I said, calm down, Gillian, you hadn't even invited me, but calm down, we are used to this.
Yeah,
You've
exactly.
been telling our
Yeah.
story for
Yeah.
centuries. I'm
Yeah.
here to watch this orchestra,
Yeah.
to hear this concert. We'll talk about this later. So I spent half the time looking at the audience as I did looking at at the orchestra, and it was almost funny, that moment at the reception, because there I was, the elephant in the room. I was the only person of colour at that reception, and I hadn't been invited, and I popped the bubble.
And
Saying, look,
it's funny, so much of what you say echoes so many experiences I had. And when I was in National Youth Orchestra, and I was also at Cheetham School of Music, and I was always almost always the only person of colour in the room, in the orchestra, definitely in my string quartet. And National Youth Orchestra in those days would have, I loved it dearly, but I don't think it would have had any understanding of even the need to talk about that. So I
Yeah.
feel such great sense of hope and joy that, that has changed. But also I'm haunted by 2015. That was the year I got elected and became the very first MP of colour of a city like Bristol. Can you believe it? Such a diverse city. And it
Yeah.
was only when I was actually on the train, and this is how much I think we sometimes repress this understanding. Only when I was on the train, literally going to Parliament, my friend Kerry, who's the neighbouring MP, said, "Do you realise you're the first?" And I think because we hadn't taken it in that I was going to be. And
Especially
and
Bristol.
and as a musician, and my father was a musician, we had so many similar experiences, but just the where you've taken it to, this is why I get a bit emotional when I think about what you've done and why you're such a role model for so many people. It's just extraordinary. And you are now, as Chineke, you're the resident orchestra at St George's, and St George's has taken on a similar sort of thing of making sure that its board is more diverse, more representative. And as a result, I believe, of that, Dr. Marianne Gournay made sure that Chineke came to my community centre in my end of town, Malcolm X Centre, in 2017 in a general election period. I've had too many of them lately. And in the middle of canvassing, I wrote in big letters on the canvassing schedule, Fangam will not be available at this point. And I was in that room, and I hope you can remember that concert, because for the people of St Paul's, it was a big moment. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about, the relationship you have with Bristol as an orchestra, and how that led to you being in St Paul's, in the Malcolm X Centre, and if you have any memories of that concert, because it was just a big moment, I think.
I do remember being in that concert, and for us it was a very moving. We had some Americans amongst us as well, playing with us, and Malcolm X is an iconic, important person in all of our lives, whether we're British, American, or British, or wherever. He peacefully showed what many people needed the support to do. Yes, our first experience I've been playing at Bristol all my career with other orchestras. I must say, when I was still at college, I was beginning to get a bit of extra work with the London Mozart players, and I played 2 concerts with them at the Colston Hall. And I felt I didn't really know the history then. That was the first time I ever went to Bristol, and I just went to where I was told to go. And I didn't really look at the name of the place. I just looked at the address, and I went. And then I since learned about it. I've never played there since.
It's not called that anymore, by the way.
Oh, I know. Oh, I know. I was
Yeah.
there. I will
Yeah.
tell you about. I'm just
Okay.
getting to that. Hang on.
Okay. Sorry.
There. What happened was, and then I've played at the St George's for the rest of my, regularly, a few times a year at St George's Bristol, with different chamber groups and with different with the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment that I used to play with for 30 years, and it turned out that Suzanne Rolt, the chief executive of St George's, was at our first Chineke concert, and within days she wrote an email saying, I want you to come and play at St George's Bristol, and I want to make you a resident orchestra. Before we'd even played a note there, we were a resident orchestra. So we'd been given this incredible status, and I was really excited because it's one of my very favourite halls in the country, and so that's how that started. And every single concert I have ever played in Bristol, I have never seen a blackface in
Yeah.
the audience. Okay,
Yeah.
all those years. And finally, when Chineke walked on the stage for the first Chineke concert in September, I think it was 2016 or early 2017, 2016.
I think so.
We had Sheku was with us. He had just won BBC Young Musician. He played a solo with us, and we walked onto that stage, and the place erupted, and it was nearly half black. The audience, it was suddenly we had got all of these other Bristolians had come to support our concert. Didn't matter what music we were playing, they felt welcomed into that room. They felt part of that community. They could walk into the St George's Bristol and listen to all this classical music, and it didn't matter. You know, you don't have to be studied in classical music or any genre of music. If you feel welcome for many other reasons, you know, you're part of that community. Paul Stevenson was in the audience. All kinds of people were in that audience, and it was an incredibly emotional experience for us. And especially me, because by then I knew all about the Bristol history. I'd educated myself. And it was a very moving moment. I knew about the bus boycotts anyway. That was something I already knew. And so to know that Paul Stevenson was coming to our concert was
Yeah.
special. Peaches Golding was there. All sorts of
Yeah.
people were there. And we met them afterwards. And then the day after that, I was invited to speak at a conference at the university in Bristol. The conference was to do about the amazing ethnic diversity in Bristol, but the terrible lack of cohesion, of integration. And I just felt everybody was skipping round something that was screaming at me. And then finally on my table, when we were about halfway through our meeting, I just said, it seems strange to me that nobody mentions Edward Colston. And then literally all eyes just looked down at the table. It went silent around my table. The white people didn't want to say anything. The black people didn't want to say anything. And I thought, I've really hit a nerve here.
Yeah.
I've touched a nerve. And that therefore tells me that this is what they need to talk about more than anything else in the room. Because this is the thing that's completely dividing people. So I don't, as I said earlier, I don't have the luxury to remain silent.
Yeah.
And so I said very, you know, just clearly and honestly from my heart, I've clearly touched a nerve with all of you because the table's gone silent. I've lost your eyes, and you know, and I feel that, you know, we are in a safe space here. We are in a safe space. So if this is the crux of what's dividing us, let's talk about this. And then gradually the black people's eyes started to come up and say, they started saying, we feel that we don't even want to say his name. And of course, many of these people were, you know, descendants of people who'd been left behind from a few centuries ago. And they gradually started, and they were so kind of sweet and innocent in the way they tentatively started to talk about it. And then gradually the white people's eyes came up, and then we started to have a very sensitive and thoughtful conversation. And I said, look, you guys, you found the nub of where you need to unpack, and it's about decolonizing the curriculums. Everyone needs to have a proper and honest education system. And so we all came back together again around this table, and then at the very end I said, it seems to me that the subject that you need to start addressing, and the things that wrap around this subject, is, you know, why you still have so many buildings in this wonderful city that is named after someone who was so brutal and you know, that led the slave trade in one of the most brutal ways back then. Again, the room fell silent, and I said, look, it's the elephant in the room, and I just really think it is part of our history. So we can't change history, but what we do now, we can take control of. And I just beg all of you to find the best way to deal with this. And it started with a few little claps so that it kind of built up. And then at the end of the meeting, the politician took me to one side and said, can I have a little word, Chichi? And I thought, oh, really, have I done the wrong thing? And she said, I just want you to know, Chichi, I just want you to read the papers in about 2 days' time, because you touched a nerve, and you touched the right nerve, because, and I read the front page of the papers a couple of days later, that the Colston Hall is going to be renamed. And so I just thought, oh, that was amazing timing, because I actually dared to say his name, and, you know,
yeah. It was a time, because it was completely coincidental, because I wasn't at that meeting, even though I was an MP by then. I'd been a bit out of action at that time, and I had around autumn 2016, around when you came, actually, because I don't have the luxury of remaining silent, and I had also called for it to be torn down. I didn't say torn, but I said, you know, it shouldn't be there. My nephews and nieces, who are also young people of colour, should not have to walk to school past this. And it's, as you said, it's not just buildings. We have streets. We had schools.
I know.
We still have a school. You know, there's a lot of work going on.
Centres.
Yeah. It was everywhere, and I found it quite shocking that the young people of colour were going to have to grow up in a city where Colston's name was everywhere. It was built in. It's a bit like sort of visiting the Soviet Union and seeing the hammer and sickle built into the underground. You know, you can take away the political system, but the symbolism's still there. So it troubled me, and it's been a bit of a time, hasn't it? And I just wonder how we're in lockdown. That's why we're doing it this way. You aren't performing in St George's this week, which is just so sad for all of us.
Yes.
You know, I've got my Chineke CDs here. I
Oh,
can listen to
wonderful.
you.
Thank you.
And I was listening to the interview you did on Radio Colourful about when you're talking about the New World Symphony, one of my favourite symphonies. And you also talk about the American Quartet, which was the first quartet I ever learned as a string quartet player. And you brought such new understanding of it to people about how Dvorak felt. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit more about how you think Chineke's role, your role in particular, as a reimaginer and a reinterpreter, and are getting more to the heart and the truth of classical music. What's it like for you in Black Lives Matter movement time, in lockdown time? I mean, even when we came on the call, you were obviously sort of packed out with things to do and people to talk to. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, because I've always just responded to life, whatever's been thrown at me in life, and I don't find the word no a very easy word to use, and or comfortable word to when I've been told that the answer's no. I always think, well, if it's something I really truly think is correct and I believe in it, then I will find a way of turning that no into a yes. I'm sort of allergic to that. There's learning these incredible things, and being able to act out what I just feel it's just doing justice. I feel I feel the work that we are doing collectively within Chineke Orchestra and the Chineke Junior Orchestra. You know, there's two orchestras.
Yes,
You know,
so exciting.
I created two on the same day. The first performance of each orchestra was on the same day at the South Bank. So we had a lot of learning to do. None of us in the orchestra had ever played a piece of music by Samuel Coleridge Taylor, which was a crime, really, because it's such glorious music and it's part of our history. It's part of our subject. He was one of the greatest composers ever to be produced by the Royal College of Music, contemporary of Vaughan Williams. Vaughan Williams and Gustav Holst all started the Royal College of Music on the same day.
God.
Can you believe that?
Yeah.
And they weren't composers. Samuel Coleridge Taylor was a violinist, and I think he sang in his church chorus, and he played the piano, and the principal of the Royal College at the time was Stanford, and he was a composer, and he believed that every single student, regardless of what instrument or voice they did, should also learn composition. So
wow.
they all started to learn composition the day they started at the Royal College of Music. And so I made a documentary for Sky Arts Passions about Samuel Coleridge Taylor. They wanted me to make this. And what I learned as I interviewed people across the industry, I interviewed the librarian at the Royal College, I interviewed the archivist at the Royal Albert Hall, as well as two living composers, contemporary composers who were students at the Royal College of Music. Neither of them had ever even heard the word Samuel Coleridge Taylor breathed throughout their 4 years of study at the Royal College of Music. Therefore, this whole thing about I'm sorry if I've lost the focus of your question, but I'm going to get round it, because the things I want to weave into it, I think, are also important. Because, for example, Samuel Coleridge Taylor was called the Black Dvorak and the Black Mahler. That's whitewashing. Yeah. And it was in some sort of way, like Charles de Saint-Georges was called the Black Mozart, even though he was 10 years older than Mozart, and Mozart actually copied him. It's this almost accepted form of endorsement. If you're endorsed by a white person, then you're okay. We always had to, even though they were getting their inspiration from us, it was an extraordinary thing, and that's why those names were written out of history. Coleridge Taylor and the various people like this. But Dvorak was a very, very important composer. He was the one invited to help America get their sound. And he wrote a lot of music that was based on the same kind of pentatonic scale that a lot of the American slaves, when they were singing their spirituals, was based around the same tonal range, around the pentatonic scale. And you know, the Dvorak's that string quartet, the American, you know about that,
Oh,
don't you?
I know it so well, and I
I
know
mean,
about it as well.
yes, and
Yes.
those were days when I was learning it, in O-level music and A-level music and listening to quartet, listening to the famous pieces of music. We listened to that. And I can remember those were those moments when I'd be in the classroom and the teacher would say, and it was called the Nigger Quartet. And I would just face the front, because it was originally called the Nigger
Oh
Quartet.
no, I didn't know that.
Oh, I thought you did.
No, no, that bit I did not know. Oh
That's
my
the original
goodness.
title of the American Quartet. And I would sit there in my
Oh,
class, in my seat, and feel my face burning with shame, embarrassment, discomfort, and I would wonder if all of my friends around me were feeling embarrassed for me, or why should I feel shame? But that word is so awful, and I
yeah.
and I was wondering if everyone was staring at me, and I would just face the front until my face would cool down. But of course, that had to be renamed in our time. It
Yeah.
was renamed during my time. It's now called the American Quartet. And I know a lot of my students and a lot of young musicians never knew what it was originally called. And there we go. So there's something quite shocking.
Yeah.
And because it was okay to be, that's how people of color were called in
Yeah.
America, very comfortably.
Yeah.
And yet, it's a shocking thing, and it's become associated synonymous with with absolute barbaric treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And such a beautiful piece of music.
Oh, it's
And
wonderful. It's
and
one of my favorite quartets of all
oh,
time.
it's just glorious. I a lump in my throat just thinking about it. It's going through my head at the moment. And
Yes.
we were studying it in the late 70s, the sort of early teens, maybe 12, 13, that age. And I honestly, I did not know that. We called it the American Quartet. Maybe that's to do with who was teaching it to us, who would never have used that word
No. Okay.
ever.
Yeah.
And that's quite powerful because this the tune, and I think later on we're going to hear you guys playing Deep River, and it's in that slow movement, isn't it? And anyone
Oh,
who's listened to this, if you don't know the American String Quartet, don't let its original title that I've now discovered put you off. It's the opposite of
yes.
what that title
I
does to
think
it.
yes, and I think it was Dvorak. He had such love and
Yeah,
respect for the music of those black people
yeah,
that he absolutely assimilated their sound and their harmonies, and just what it does, that squeeze on your heart
yeah,
when you hear that music, when you hear spirituals, when you hear some of Dvorak's music. It was obviously something he loved. He made something beautiful from it, and I think that's out of his respect for those people. And when he was asked to come to America to be the principal of the first music college, the classical music was already live and kicking and embedded in Europe, but the Americans were just latching onto classical music, the art form.
mm,
And this, I can't remember her name. She was the sort of philanthropist and visionary about the lady who invited Dvorak, because he was very famous in his day. She invited him to be the principal of this first conservatoire, and then she asked him to we don't have an American sound. I mean, if you hear Bach or Beethoven, you're in Germany. If
yeah.
you hear Handel, Messiah, you're in England. Although Handel was born in Germany, but he moved to England as a young man and lived there most of his life. If you hear, Poulenc, you're in France,
Of course.
etc. So, but you don't know, or Rossini, you're in Italy.
Mm.
You don't know where you are when you with American music yet. And so she asked him to go across the. She asked him to write a symphony that would give them the American sound.
Yeah.
And so he said, "I will do this one." And then he went and travelled the country. He wanted to listen to the country. And that's when he heard spirituals, and that's when he heard all this music, and he heard Native Americans' music as well. Came back and said, "This is the sound of your country," and gave us the Ninth Symphony.
And it's there in the way you guys play it, I've got to say.
Really?
It's yeah.
Ah,
Well, maybe I'm projecting onto it. I don't know, but having heard you talk about it and how you've helped me to re-understand a piece that I knew every note of so
yeah.
well,
Yeah.
and now you've even helped me to re-understand a string quartet that I thought I knew in my bones. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, this is one of the things I'm going to sort of answer my own question a little bit here. I think this is one of the things that you do so powerfully as you as an individual and as Chineke, is that you're helping not just retell the history of classical music by not just filling in gaps, but actually pointing out where we were pioneers. Black people were actually pioneers of classical music at points that's just been erased. But you've also brought the audience to the music and the music to the audience. And I just wondered if in the, we could talk all morning, and I know we can't, but we clearly could. In the sort of 5 minutes we've got left, if you could tell us a little bit about how life during lockdown for Chineke is taking that mission and that vision forward, because I had a look at the things you had planned for this summer, and I feel sort of robbed, really. We're not going to see you here, and the thing that you talked about on Colourful Radio, I'm not even sure that was, with the 300 amateur chorus and all sorts of things. Where does that where does that take us now at this moment? Where does the role of Chineke and of you as Chi Chi, where are you going in this Black Lives Matter moment?
Well, a lot of, the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's gone there has affected all of us, even, so deeply. And we're in recovery from more than one thing, as you know.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we have been so creative during this lockdown. And as I said to you, when someone says no, you can't do something, I'm immediately trying to think of a creative way to change that no. And so my initial response to this shocking thing of lockdown, because as a musician, it's
Yeah.
not just, I can sit here in my music room and play 10 hours a day if I like, but it doesn't mean the same.
No.
I spent several hours in here yesterday working on a new concerto that I hope that we are going to bring to Bristol, actually. But I can do my practice here. But what we do as musicians, it's not only the communing with our fellow colleagues either side of us when we're playing music together as an orchestra or a quartet or a chamber ensemble. It's the communing with the audience. Even if we're repeating the same concert 6 times in different venues, everyone feels differently because allow ourselves to be so open to the audience. And so for me to be told lockdown, what, are you crazy?
Mm.
What do you mean we can't? All these concerts are cancelled, tour of America, all sorts of things were cancelled. So I immediately thought, I'm not only going to reach out to my colleagues, and not only are we going to play, we're going to do some digital recording, but we're going to try and reach a bigger and wider audience, even bigger and wider audience. So I started to make collaborations with the Sphinx organization in Detroit, and also Orchids, the junior program in Baltimore, and Gustavo Dudamel's youth orchestra in Los Angeles. So you can see it on our website. The first project we did, it's called Music Across the Ocean. There are 5 movements, and it's based on the Othello Suite and by Coleridge Taylor. And we also did a short piece about how we put this production together, because I just felt we have got to play music. This is what we do. This is going to help us all get through this time.
Yeah.
And so what it's resulted in is, we've become so creative. The projects that we've done, that we're still creating during lockdown, I think are bound to carry with us. We're going to carry them with us after lockdown's lifted, and it's clear that our reliance on technology has been strengthened, and we were so lucky that we had the last concert that we did on the 23rd of February at the Queen Elizabeth Hall. We didn't know at the time that was our last concert, our last live concert, and so we used that as the template for this lockdown performance. Our survival, Chineke's survival, is vital to the music industry, because we are the only orchestra organisation that is leading by putting diversity and inclusion truly at the heart and the forefront of the whole organisation, because there's a danger in uncertain economic times that all the work that's been done so far in other organisations within the industry to create and attract more diverse workforces and audiences, as the Arts Council puts it, they're all going to be shelved in order to prioritise, running costs or just trying to stay afloat at this time, or I don't imagine them keeping a deep commitment to diversity and inclusion, and so therefore we have to really be looked after, and this crisis has been exacerbated. The stats show that Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse people are so disproportionately affected by the virus, with the higher rates of infection and death, etc. And we have to, the discrimination in the workplace and lower income jobs, and it's so obvious that this has happened to me. And as a leader of a diversity and inclusion leader, Chineke aims to get the message out to the Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse young people that their contribution is valuable, and that we will continue to support them and them to become leaders of the future in the creative industries. It's and I have said this. I've had lots of meetings with the DCMS, and almost every week, there's leaders of orchestras around the country with DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, the government, the culture minister is hearing our voices. I'm so glad that they've included Chineke, because we are the only orchestra that's leading from this perspective. They've got to protect us.
Yes.
And, we are so used to being resilient. We are resourceful people. And, we've been beaten down for 400 years and we're still going. And this, I think, shows, I think our innate strength is so visible to me. And that's why we are going to come out of it strong. And I know that more people have been affected by the COVID, and that's because they've been forced to be on the front line. My parents would have been the same. Both my parents worked for more than 40 years each for the NHS, and they would have been out there, in the face of death. We just keep going, and we believe so strongly in our mission that keeps us alive and focused. I so believe in every single player in the Chineke family. I have high expectations for every single player, from the juniors. I don't know if you saw the juniors in Britain's Got Talent.
Yeah.
But that was quite a spectacle. They're just incredible. The juniors at this very moment are preparing. They've got two very exciting other things that they're preparing at the moment. So everybody, keep your eyes peeled.
Can you tell us at all? Give us a hint.
I can't.
Okay.
Signed an NDA.
Okay.
But there is two very important things that different things that you're going to be able to see, and also they're preparing a wonderful performance of Beethoven's Coriolan Overture, which is going to be a digital performance of 64 musicians. And there were 65 of them on the Britain's Got Talent thing. But when you do those grids, you can only do 7 by 7, 8 by 8. So one person's been ditched, Luckily, there's only timpani. There's not timpani and percussion. So that was quite easy, really, to sort out. So that's very, very exciting. And I say to them, because we all know that even, it doesn't matter how well your parents have prepared you for life. And if you've got a good set of parents like I was lucky enough to have, that my parents gave us the understanding that there was nothing that we couldn't do, that maybe it's a little bit naive that so they would say, well, hard work and perseverance, and you can do it.
Yes.
Hard work and perseverance. Yeah, but still, when you walk through the door, you still, if you don't look away a certain way, that's going to go against you. I think they tried to protect us a little bit from that by actually saying that, but we kind of knew. And then it was when we were turned 7, 8 years of age when started to experience our first kind of racial attacks at school, and that's when our parents waited until that happened for them to then start telling us about how to handle ourselves in those situations. I was never very good at it. I mean, my reaction to when I was attacked at school and had things done to me, which were horrible, I did the thing that, because I was so literal. My father used to say, "Turn the other cheek."
Yeah.
When they go low, you go high.
Go
And it's
high. Yeah.
amazing. He was saying that to us when I was 7. And it's Michelle Obama, it's the Obama's mantra. But it was my father used to say that to us when we were children. When they go low, you go high, or you beat the shit out of them. If they've been sorry, you beat the hell out of them if they've been. I mean, the thing is, I got attacked several times, and I never raised a
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
I took from my father was turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
And I let people got away with murder. I mean,
Yeah.
even something came up recently when one of my brothers, who's written a book about growing up as a mixed race child in Great Britain, in Britain, he there was one thing that he spoke about, and it was the day when he spotted what was going on to me with me at lunchtimes at school, where this little group of girls were spitting in my lunch. And I thought I was so ashamed of this. I was ashamed of it
Yeah.
because I didn't know what I had done.
Yeah.
I was about 8. I didn't know what I had done. And I thought, I sort of deep down, I suppose my inner self must have known it's because I've got a different skin color, because or there's something about my very presence that is a threat to these people. There's something about my very essence that has made me deserve this kind of treatment. And yet, I couldn't justify it. And so I remained silent in the fact that I didn't report those girls because I was frightened of the consequences. Because there was more of them than me. And I couldn't think what I'd done. I hadn't done anything to them. We were one of the few families that were all on, free school lunches. And, I'm the oldest of 5 children, and we're very close in age. And we were all filled up half the school, And it was when my brother wrote this book, and then he wrote it. And I had put that memory away from my mind throughout most of my life.
Of course.
And it brought up such a well of shame and grief and I felt weak and vulnerable because I didn't know what to do as a child. I never told my parents. I never told the teachers, and I felt ashamed of myself. And it was a powerful kind of awakening when I read it in my book, because of course I remembered it as soon as I read it, but I had successfully hidden it from my memory. And how do you deal with that? These things that pop up now and again and reminds you of these awful things. And because I didn't understand it, I didn't understand it because I understood punishment when you've done something wrong.
Yeah.
And so
it made no sense.
How was I meant to understand it? And therefore, that's one of those things I'm still now trying to deal with, because I know I have suffered injustices throughout my career as well that I just didn't call out.
Yeah.
And I know I didn't call out because I was just trying to survive in the industry.
Yeah.
And I knew I had to be twice as good to get half as far. And I was twice as good getting half, and I've held, and I had to keep my head down to get where I got to so that I could then create Chineke.
Yeah.
Almost earn my place into the establishment. Now I can do this because I've got that strength.
And you've spoken so powerfully of the need to keep the ladder there and the door open and all other lovely images you've created that once you get to that point. And I think the sacrifices that one might make as a person of colour along the way in a career like yours, they are something which, having earned them, you are then, I get a real sense from you that you feel not just duty bound, but honour bound to make sure that the door is wide open for other young people, young musicians of colour, and across art forms. We're going to have to stop talking, sadly. I'm dying to ask you if you got a response yet from Boris Johnson, from this fantastic letter that you wrote.
Can you believe it? He has not responded, and I think I think it's shame on him
Yeah.
because the incredible thing about it, I called out so many things in that
Yes,
letter.
you did.
And it's because he's asking for more commissions. Let's
Yeah.
do another study on what's going.
I know.
We know what's
We all
going
know
on.
all that.
The
Exactly.
study's been done. Let's
All been done.
implement. Listen to David Lammy.
Yeah.
You know, even
It's all
Doreen
there.
Lawrence. I mean,
Yeah.
I just sent that letter out to leaders in the arts
Yeah.
section across the country, and I had people from outside the arts, like
Yes.
Doreen Lawrence,
Yeah.
said, "I've seen that letter, Chichi. I want to
Yeah.
sign it."
And
And
I think that's where I wanted us to leave our time together was this. There are still things to be answered.
yes,
The authorities cannot just say, right, we've heard Black Lives Matter, that's it, we'll commission some sort of review and then job done. We're not going away anytime soon. Your
no,
letter must be answered. By the way, he hasn't answered mine either, but that's, and I'm an elected representative, but you're a role model. We both should be answered. And I think that there are unanswered questions which our establishment, I think if they think we're just going to go quiet at this point, they are much mistaken.
yeah,
And I wanted to thank you as we come out of our time together for what you've done as a role model, not just for people of color, but for the classical music industry, for the classical music industry to realize that actually we are richer and better off when we acknowledge the diversity of all talented people,
yes,
that we've been poorer when we've cut those people out.
absolutely.
I feel that about, you say you had to be twice as good to get half as far. And I feel that about my dad, who is an incredible under resort used talent. And I chose to leave the classical music world after a while because I just thought I can do other stuff. I'm a happy amateur now. I think being a classical musician as a happy amateur at my
Me
stage of life
too.
is a great joy.
Yes.
And but we see people like you as role models, and I'm grateful to you. And I would just like us to finish. We're going to go out listening to the rendition that you've made of Deep River, which we referred to earlier. And I just wondered if you could just say just briefly who's playing in this,
Yes.
and then
Well,
we'll go into hear it at the end.
it was such a moment where, in fact, a few days before that, I was with all the meetings that I've been having with the black cultural leaders across the country. We're having Zoom meetings and talking about what we have to do, and what we're not going to settle for. And it was after sort of an emotional meeting. I just sat in my music room and played all four parts of. I just found a four-part harmony version of Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Deep River, and I played all four parts. And then I thought, no, we need to go further than this. And then so I've got Ronald Long, a Black American violinist who lives in Europe between Belgium and London, playing violin. Natalia Senior Brown, a Black British viola player who lives in Manchester. Desmond Naismith, our co-principal cellist, who was born and raised in Croydon, spent some time studying in the United States and became the original cellist of the Harlem Quartet. He was in the States, lived in the States for between 5 and 8 years. He's back here now. And then myself on the bass line. And I just shared out the parts with those three. And so we did this rendition of Deep River in honour of George Floyd and all others who've gone before him, as a sign of respect and a sign of it's a place of healing, because music is one of those things that you can turn to at all kinds of difficult times.
Chichi Nwanaku, thank you so much for visiting Bristol virtually, and we will see you again in real life very soon. Thank you.
I hope so. Thank you very much.